following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for practical advice for everyday problems using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This episode, let's say I'm on 1/4 impulse power. By the way, watch Picard Season 3. It is so good. Picard has gotten so good this season. But I've been having health issues since last Tuesday. I've talked about the various things I deal with. It has not been a great week for me. And I already did an episode on spoons and energy. So I'm not going to go over that again tonight. I want to do something different tonight. And I already had the guest book to deal with this. So the absolutely lousy way our society, institutions, and social groups treat disabled and mentally ill people. And no, I did not say people with disabilities. Because, okay, we can say that all we want. We can say that, oh, we care about the self-esteem of people like me. But people like me are treated like we're useless because we can't work consistent 60 to 80 hour weeks. And I don't care what anybody says, softer language doesn't overcome that. I had an autoimmune disease and vagus nerve issues, and oh my God, I wrote out the entire thing and it was way too long for this show. And that was even before I got COVID. But COVID made a lot of pre-existing symptoms so much worse. I'll spare you the gory details, but they go from being slowing me down to some days they are debilitating. And this has been going on for 9 months now. And this is how I've been treated. Not, oh, you went through a thing that was beyond your control. It was a global pandemic and you were one of the unlucky ones. No. I've been treated like a burden, like I'm lazy, like I'm faking, like I'm exaggerating. And in some cases, even like long COVID is punishment for some moral transgression. Yeah, I've gotten some interesting hate mail on that one from people watching my Twitter feed. It's an issue that's become politicized. It's a condition that's become politicized. And so people act out. And people like me are really easy places for people to dump their fear and rage. And that's why the term disabled person makes more sense to me in this context. Because too often, it's not the condition that disables us. It's the world. We're perfectly capable of doing a lot of things with very small accommodations. But the systems don't make those accommodations. And so they put too many talented people on the sidelines. They disable us from using our skills. So you notice this show is already real. And like I said, I already had the perfect guest to talk about succeeding while the world trying to put you in the disabled pile. Aaron Broverman, lead editor of Forbes Advisor Canada, is going to talk to us later about why overcoming disabilities is the wrong way to frame things. Okay, my team pitched the overcoming disabilities thing when we booked him. That's a thing. I probably wouldn't have gone about it that way because, you don't overcome where the world shoves you, right? You live with it. And That's one of the reasons I say top 10 phrase, healthy goals are based on things you can control. If you want to ask a question, leave a comment, or make a suggestion, go to nottherapyshow.com. Join our mailing list, leave a comment, and you can sign up for our workshop. Stop beating yourself up. We're going to show you how. April 29th online, 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Tickets are only $10, and they are 2 for 1. You can bring a friend for free. Or you can follow me. I'm terrible at keeping this up. I gotta be better. Nottherapyshow.com, on Twitter, and sometimes Instagram. I don't like Instagram. But first, one of those comments that came through nottherapyshow.com. And this was a very humbling comment. It was in response to the stuff we've been doing about beating yourself up with the bubbleheads in frequent weeks, and then the episode we did last week on trauma. Hi, Liana. I just wanted to let you know how much I really related to your last 2 episodes. I'm currently working on rebuilding myself after a lifetime of emotional abuse from my father and then my ex-husband of a 15-year relationship. My trauma hit a climax after I gave birth to my daughter. I didn't know it at the time, but I had postpartum depression. Then when my daughter was 6 months old, my grandfather died. Then another 6 months later, my brother committed suicide. During this time, I had no support from my husband, who chose to be MIA as much as he could, and when he was around would only complain about how I wouldn't have sex with him, which is pretty hard to do when the other person isn't even present, on top of dealing with a grief and depression. My family and friends all live far away, about a 10-hour drive or a very expensive plane ride. So my support group was pretty much non-existent. It took me a full 5 years to crawl out of my grief and depression to the point of just feeling decent again. At that point, I found out that my husband had been lying and cheating on me for pretty much our entire relationship. I found out from one of the women he cheated with. He still denies it to this day. There I was. There's so much more detail, but I'll just give the Coles notes. I know that feeling, commenter. Just cut to the chase, right? I was really compelled to share my story with you after listening to the last 2 episodes, mostly because there were so many OMG, that's me moments, especially the work of trying to trust people again. It's so hard to explain to people or even understand myself the amount of damage emotional abuse and trauma can do to a person. Anyway, I just want to thank you for your show. I appreciate your blunt honesty. Take care and all the best. All right. I live for the OMG, that's me moments. Feeling seen is so important. And that's why I say it's not therapy and I am not a therapist, because those can only come from people who have been through similar experiences. That's why I bring on my team. That's why I have the guests. Sometimes they're professionals. Sometimes they're just regular people, because feeling seen is so important to improved mental wellness. I also love when people celebrate my blunt honesty. This is a bit of feedback that always surprises me about the show, that people like the blunt honesty, because that's something I've been criticized a lot for in other places. I'm actually softening my inner voice a lot here, which says a lot about my inner voice. But that's the thing about living with a disability and being disabled by the world. That reality really makes you make friends with reality, seeing the way things are. I love reality. Granted, my reality involves superheroes, magic, and a whole lot of weirdness. But that again, healthy goals is based on things you can control, right? I can take the facts of my day-to-day and make them seem like misery, or make them seem like a really cool story, right? You can be just some blind person, or you can be Daredevil. Now, that is not something you can do every day. Everybody has low moments. Everyone has frustrations. But no matter what challenges you have, there are things you can succeed at. There are places where you can not only be happy, but contribute to the world. And that's why I'm so happy to have this guest this week, because don't take my word for it. Take his. Aaron Broverman is going to be with me after the break. Aaron Broverman is the lead editor of Forbes Advisor Canada, obviously a person with a disability, and he's going to join me after the break to talk about overcoming disabilities and why neither of us like that term. So stay tuned. I'm really looking forward to this interview. Still, it's not therapy. I'm not a therapist. We'll be back after this break. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. And it's time for the interview. Like I said before the break, Aaron Broverman, lead editor of Forbes Advisor Canada. It's the personal finance offshoot of Forbes. He also writes about disabilities for numerous websites that my cat is sitting on. Abilities Magazine is one of them. I had to move my cat. Sorry about that, Aaron. He's a resident of Waterloo with his wife and son, and he has over a decade of experience writing in the personal finance space. Now, people might be like, why do you have a finance guy talking about disabilities? And that's exactly the point, right, Aaron? We aren't defined by our disabilities, even though they're a big part of our lives, correct?
I would say that, Liana. My disability is cerebral palsy.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the theme of this episode is sort of overcoming disability. And I sort of bristle at that because, it's just my life. This is a
Mm-hmm.
disability that I was born with.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what I'm overcoming. There of course are, medical interventions that had to happen for
Mm-hmm.
me to get to where I am now. And I definitely use adaptive equipment to get around, like a mobility scooter or crutches. But so there are things that I need to overcome, but there are things that everyone needs to overcome, disability or not. So, as a person born with a disability, I feel like if you say you're overcoming your disability, like that's a negative thing that automatically assumes that nobody wants to be disabled. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, I guess if you're talking about mortality, everybody sort of gets a little like, there's a, how do people think of weakness and what is weak, that sort of thing. Of course, I have a different perspective than someone who has like an acquired disability, somebody who, started out as a non-disabled person and has experienced a loss of capability. I've never
Mm-hmm.
experienced that loss, so I can't speak to, maybe they feel like they're overcoming their disability by still being able to live their lives the way that they used to. But for me, since this is my life, it's hard to say that I'm overcoming anything.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of these discussions, the discourse, if you will, gets bogged down in language. I mean, Autism Awareness Month uh, started for me with, hey, everybody, let's be respectful about symbols and terminologies. And why do you think the language fight gets so heated? Because I'm on the same side as you are. I have multiple disabilities. One's an autoimmune disease. I have long COVID, but I wear glasses. And most people don't think of that as a disability, right? But a disability advocate friend of mine pointed out it's an assisted, it's an adaptive device, glasses,
Right.
right? Why do we put people who need glasses in a completely different category than anything else? It's because of quality of life. Correct. So why do you think people fight over words so much when I think we're both in the same boat where there's other fights to have?
It's because there's different schools of thought, and I
Mm-hmm.
think there's so many. When you're talking about disability, you're talking about a large group of people with so many different needs, because
Mm-hmm.
within disability there's so many different individual experiences and actual disabilities that and not everybody thinks about disability the same way. Like some people want you to acknowledge that they are disabled and it's
Hmm.
a part of their life. It's part of disability pride. Other people would prefer to hide their disability and try to pass as a non-disabled person. So because there are so many different schools of thought and so many different ways of thinking about disability, like is the disability the diagnosis, for example, and is that something that the doctors have to cure, or is the disability more the environment? If the environment was more accessible or more socially accepting, your disability would be less disabling. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? And because
Hmm.
there's so many different ways to think about disability and so many different um needs that people have, what depending on what their disability is, everybody has a different take, even people who have disabilities, on what the language for that should be.
Yeah, there is an attitudinal thing, isn't there? Like you said about um various things that I think are accommodations that should be accommodations for everybody. Limiting stress, for instance. That's a big thing for people like me who have an autoimmune disease, but stress isn't good for anyone. And the fact that I get treated like I'm somehow going to be a drag because people can't abuse me without visible stuff, as opposed to people just going home and, you know, not liking them. That it shows sort of a cultural attitude towards, I think, not just treating humans like humans, but also there's a big fear of difference
Right.
wrapped up in it. Have you experienced any of that? Because I mean, you're in finance. That's a rough and tumble industry.
I think honestly, because I have a visible physical disability
Hmm.
that's known, like I use two forearm crutches and a mobility
Hmm.
scooter, it's almost easier for me because people can immediately put me in the he is actually disabled
Okay.
box. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah.
If you're a person with an invisible disability, people are like, "Come on, like, are you trying to get away with something?" You know what I
Right.
mean? They're immediately suspicious. Plus, when you're dealing with something like disability, you're immediately confronting people with their own mortality in the sense that you're
Okay.
reminding them that they're going to die eventually. You know what I mean?
That's
And
interesting.
people don't, I think, are uncomfortable with disability because they're uncomfortable with the notion that they'll ever be weaker or they'll ever need help or they'll ever,
Ah.
need assistance, because it just reminds them that they're just closer to death. It's the same sort of weirdness people have around aging and
Mm.
getting old, right? But honestly, like, disability can happen at any time to
Hmm.
anyone. And as my friend Kent Losgard used to say, you're only one moment's experience away from disability. So it's not like, you're only going to get it when you're old,
Right.
or, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I did an event with a couple of U.S. Army veterans, and they have the same spinal problem in the exact same place. And I said, "What happened there?" They're like, "The body armor. It's right where the body armor starts." And so they have the same. I'm like, wow, there's a lot more people with disabilities walking around or not walking around than people think. And a friend of mine who uses a wheelchair, something I noticed through him, people talk to him like he's deaf, which makes no sense. It's his legs that don't work well, not his ears. And that was one of those things I'm like, I don't get it. Do they think he's less able to understand? Have you experienced any of that where people talk to you like you're deaf or stupid?
There's definitely a value judgment
Okay.
where people think, some people, it's getting better now, I have to
Yeah.
say. Some people say that just because you have a physical disability, there's got to be some sort of mental disability component to that.
Interesting.
Like it's happened before, to my friends and to me, that if I'm out with someone who looks non-disabled and is walking around,
Right.
a waiter or waitress will talk to them instead of me about what I want to order. You know what I mean? What would he like, kind of thing. And it's sort of, it's infantilizing, right?
Yeah.
Or my friend who has a non-disabled wife, they don't immediately place her as his wife, they place her as his caregiver
Yeah.
because he's in a wheelchair, right? So there is definitely a value judgment around disability. You are lesser, you are weaker, you are
Mm-hmm.
missing something. And I guess on a rudimentary, like, human instinctual level, I get it. But then if you carry it into the more intellectual thing, people are always like, yeah, like, why do we treat people this way? You need to step back before you say things. You need to, like,
Mm-hmm.
think through, how you're approaching a situation. I think the awareness has gotten better, though, about, disability, and how we are supposed to talk about it and how we normalize it. So I don't get that quite as much, where I'm not being talked to, and instead, the waiter is talking about me to someone else who
Mm-hmm.
can, like, better take care of the situation. Still happens on flights often. Like, the Air
Interesting.
Canada people will talk amongst themselves, asking each other questions about, like, what do we do with the wheelchair? How do we do it? And I say, like, I can answer those questions those questions for you, kind of thing. So it still happens, but not as often as it used to.
But they don't know their own policy.
Well, sometimes, like, if I don't call ahead and
Mm-hmm.
say that I need assistance or accessibility, it very much throws them off.
Yeah.
And, like, oh, and not every plane has a
Yeah.
way to, like, get on. What do we do, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And instead of telling me what the problem is or what the holdup is, like any other passenger,
Right.
they sort of, I don't want to, I guess they don't want to disturb me, they don't want to worry me, they don't want to bother me. I'm dealing with enough in the sense of my disability.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll try to, like, talk to each other, when really, like, if that happens, I'm confused. I don't know what's going on. Like, you need to talk
Yeah.
directly to me
Yeah.
for me to figure it out.
Yeah. In the circles I run in, we call that it's the ride and the show phenomenon. Like all of a sudden it's a big deal and there's this thing and everybody knows something's going on that's not, congratulations, folks. Enjoy the ride and the show. But the fact that we're still here when policy is simple, getting people in the right headspace, that's really the issue, right? I mean, you would think people that are so trained in this stuff that have to deal with it more and more regularly would know what to do, but they don't. And I think that goes back to that thing you mentioned about weakness and accepting our limits as humans.
Mhm.
And that seems to be a contentious thing. But again, you work in finance. That's an industry defined by the hustle, right?
Right.
You have to be pretty high performing to be in that industry for 10 years. So let's drill down on that. I'm sure you have thoughts, so I'll just give you the floor on this whole thing about weakness and usefulness to society, shall we say?
Well, I mean, yeah, like, I do think that had I been a journalist in a different time,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have been able to be a journalist. Uh, Many times, even when I was first starting, I graduated from Ryerson, what used to be Ryerson
Mm-hmm.
University,
Mm-hmm.
in 2007, with a journalism degree. Now it's Toronto Metropolitan
Yeah.
University, and basically you needed to be able to drive, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the time, in order to, get the newspaper job, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never going to drive. You have to go through extra adapted hoops if you're a person with disability who needs to
Mm-hmm.
drive. You have to pay for those hoops, then you have
Mm-hmm.
to adapt the car. It's a
Mm-hmm.
whole pain. So, and it wasn't something my parents were going to do when I was, like,
Mm-hmm.
16 or graduating and that sort of thing. So, but now with technology, with things like Zoom, things like my job, even though it's in finance and it's marked by the hustle and all that sort of thing, it's fully remote. I
Yeah.
work with a global team, and um I don't have to leave my house. Like literally what I'm talking to you on is my method of
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah.
And I talk to my entire team, people all over the world who, work for the different websites. Like we're
Hmm.
global. We have Australia, we have Italy, we have all these sites, and I talk to them on Slack. And I
Hmm.
think like, if I had to like, run to the library every time I needed to do some research, or if I couldn't talk to people on the phone, or if I actually had to send things to in the post office and that kind of thing, or
Hmm.
even if I had to like meet people for all of my interviews,
Yeah.
if I had to like arrange transportation and all that sort of stuff, I wouldn't be able to do this job. So the
Yeah.
fact that like technology has kind of caught up, and honestly, the pandemic has shown people that there's no stigma around working from home or remote
Hmm.
work, and people actually prefer it and are fighting for it in their jobs now. So, when people with disabilities were doing that, it was like, oh no, we can't. Like it's never been done
Hmm.
before. How are we going to do this? But now, I mean, the curtain has been lifted.
Yeah.
The wizard has been revealed, and so many more people with disabilities that couldn't work in the traditional sense of like going to an office
Hmm.
now can. So I'm kind of fortunate that like technology has caught up with, the fact that I have a disability that may have prevented me from doing this job, just a few years ago.
That's a really good point. Aaron, hang on. We got to take a break. Aaron Broverman, lead editor of Forbes Advisor Canada, will be back with us after this break on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. You're going to want to hang on and still listen to more that we have to say. Coming back after a few minutes. Stay tuned. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I am Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. I'm still talking to Aaron Broverman, lead editor of Forbes Advisor Canada, and person with a disability, disabled person. We've both been called far worse. Now, Aaron, before the break, you made a good point. A couple years after I trashed my knee as a video game conference, well, former video game conference, it's gone now because people prefer to stay home, called E3. And I was living in compression garments. Like it was the worst. It was agonizing. And you shouldn't have to be able to use your legs to press buttons. And even though I joke that I'm literally a lame person, because for people who don't know, that's what lame actually means. It means you walk with a limp. The 3 stairs between me and my destination at that point. That was like 40 floors, those 2 years. And like you said, it's all of a sudden your life changes. But I think even when you live with it all your life, that 3 stairs phenomenon, it's real. And the fact that it has changed, is there, because I know I have those moments where this is great. I'm going to feel really frustrated that people didn't listen before this, and then I'm going to go be happy. Is this something that you've experienced as well, the frustration?
I definitely get frustrated.
Yeah.
Like we could have been doing this, people with disabilities could have been gainfully employed. More of them could have been
Mm-hmm.
gainfully employed a lot longer
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
They could have been off of, income support, which is not enough money to live on,
Yeah.
and, using their skills, because there's a lot of people with disabilities that, have a lot of education and a lot of degrees, but can't get actual jobs because the moment that they show up for the interview, it's like, whoa, like I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not prepared
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when people talk about privilege or ableism. I think that's a big part, that people are afraid they're gonna get in trouble down the road, so they don't hire and include a person with a disability now. And they have that privilege to make that choice. The person with the disability doesn't. How close was I in that explanation there?
It's actually a lot easier to provide accommodations
Uh-huh.
in an office environment than people think that it is. Like they
Mm-hmm.
think it's going to be a huge hassle and they're going to have to fill out paperwork and they're going to have to pay all this money. But there's a lot of support and like
Yeah.
even like government coverage for
Yeah.
that sort of thing. There are tax breaks for adapting your house and stuff like that. So I think this idea that like, oh, it's gonna be a hassle, we're just gonna do it the old way because that's the way that I know,
Mm-hmm.
like that's a myth. Like
Yeah.
because when I've gotten people to adapt things, it's like, why didn't we do this before? Like this was so easy, and it benefits the non-disabled people. There's like a universal design that you were talking about, where
Mm-hmm.
like all of a sudden everyone else is getting some side benefit out of something that you adapted for the visibly disabled person. I mean, for you, it's got to be harder to approach an employer about an adaptation
Mm-hmm.
because you have to get them to believe you have a disability first, right?
Yeah, I mean, people haven't even heard of mixed connective tissue disease. Right. They're like, what? It's like, the COVID drug, hydroxychloroquine. Yeah, that's what I'm on for a real thing. They get that because of that. They're like, that's actually for something. It's like, yeah, lupus like conditions. Now they know lupus, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't know what it is. And again, it's one of those things that hits everybody differently. But I think that there are trade offs, right? Because they can't see it, they can put it to the back of mind. It's a different set of problems. It's not better or worse, it's just different,
Mm-hmm.
right? They can go, oh, okay, maybe we can still push. Whereas somebody who shows up with adaptive devices, they can't ignore it the same
Yeah.
way.
And they can immediately place it. Like, oh,
Yeah.
this person has a disability. I see the
Mm-hmm.
crutches, that kind of thing. Like, there's got to be another layer for you though too, because you were on TV for so long, and people already have a preconceived perception of who you are and what you do. They must be like, what do you mean you're disabled? Like, you were doing all this stuff. I saw it like
Yeah.
before. Like, what, kind of thing. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, Selena Gomez is doing awesome stuff for that,
right.
right? Because
Hmm.
she needed organ transplants because of
Hmm.
lupus, and she's killing it on Only Murders in the Building.
Right.
But they probably have to limit her work hours, because I know if it's anything like what I go through, you can be great until you get off your routine. You don't get enough sleep, you push yourself too hard, you get too stressed out, then you get a flare up, then it's an issue, and it's the, spin the wheel of symptoms. But honestly, I think that looking back to the TV days, they shouldn't have put anyone through the abusive workplace practices that were considered normal, that
Right.
probably contributed to me ending up here. And
Right.
I talk about that a lot on this show, but people don't like change,
Mhm.
really is the big thing. I had a friend who was in a mobile scooter. He's passed on now, but every time we had to accommodate him in the scooter, someone would groan and say they didn't want to do it. And I said, I'm sure he doesn't want to have to need this. So
Yeah.
let's everybody take a little bit, because I want him there.
Right.
But there
Yeah.
has to be someone in the room willing to make that argument. Because when you think about it, that's awful that somebody doesn't want to take 15 minutes of effort to make sure somebody can get up a walk up on a third level venue. Because a lot of comedy clubs aren't
Yeah.
accessible in Toronto
Totally.
still. They get all these deferments
Mhm.
from the disability, from the accessibility law, because they're old buildings.
Yes.
And it's it's 15 minutes, and people make it like there's this big deal about it. And
Mm.
I can't unsee that as
Yeah.
an organizer or a manager. That to me, that speaks to deeper issues than just someone being lazy.
Right. And I know who you're talking about. I
Okay.
know who your friend is.
Yeah,
And I saw that happen.
you
Like
did.
people used to have to lift him into the club at the place that
And
he regularly worked. Not a random club that he showed up and toured at.
yeah.
It was the club that he worked on at a day on a daily basis that
Mm-hmm.
they had to like lift him and carry
Yeah.
him up the stairs every single day. Like it wasn't a surprise. Like they could have done something,
Mm-hmm.
but I understand that like renovations are expensive, and I understand that you don't want to like mess with the infrastructure of the building, but I mean, they could have tried. Like they could have seen, tried to look into it, like that kind of thing. It seems like people with disabilities have to work around everybody else because they don't want to be inconvenienced
Yeah.
by your disability
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. R.I.P. Andre Aruda. I'll just say his name because
Yeah.
we know. Yeah.
Andre
Yeah. Yeah.
Rita. There you go. Like,
Funny guy. Funny
I
guy. Gone too
definitely.
soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was eye-opening for me. And he took it with good humor. He was a comedian, right? But
Hmm.
that to have to go through that every single time, the ride in the show
Right.
phenomenon, and the fact that nobody went, you know what, this doesn't make sense, because he's not the only comedian dealing with a disability.
Right.
There are people who, might not need an adaptive device, but it probably would be easier for them if they could sit or
Hmm.
at least lean on the stool, but they don't want to look different, so they
Yeah.
don't. And that's the sort of stuff where I'm just like, this world.
Yeah.
So
Because
what?
you're creating an ableism in people because you basically said, it's easier to adapt and not be a pain in the ass for people. So I'm just gonna no, I'm fine. And I'm gonna like grit it out, and I'm gonna create an ableism in myself, and
Mhm.
not advocate for myself because it's gonna be hard. I don't want the fight. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I'd rather just do my thing the way that I'm doing it. And I mean, for Andre specifically, I mean,
Mhm.
he had friends in high places. Like he knew the founder of Yuck Yucks, he
Yeah.
knew people that could have done things. And the thing that happens is, they like you, they're friends with you, they want to talk to you and like hang out with you. But as soon as you want to talk to them about something real,
Nah.
like maybe adapting their club, it's like, oh, sorry, we're buddies, but like, that's kind of where people start hemming and hawing.
Yeah.
So it's worse when people are smiling at you as they're telling you they can't
That's a good point.
accommodate stuff. Like
That's a
I'd
really good
rather
point.
have somebody say to me, I don't want to hire people with disabilities. I don't want to work with them. Like at least I know where you're coming from, rather than like trying to still pretend to be a good person good person.
That's the double-edged sword of it being a protected class, right?
Right.
Because they know they can't say it because it's against the law. But because they're people aren't open about it, it's very hard to prove that's the reason. So you can't do anything about it. As long
Yeah.
as they know the code word, they know the nudge and a wink,
Mhm.
they can continue to discriminate, and the onus is on the person with a disability to prove it.
Yeah. And as a result, nobody wants to have a disability. So it just continues keeping it, in the dark and because nobody likes to disclose. No, people don't think of disability as just having brown eyes or another,
Right.
quality that makes the world diverse.
Yeah.
They think of it as like, oh no, like I'm gonna be like this person and I see all the things that they have to go through.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Yep.
want to be this. And then we get back to the earlier part of the conversation, which is you're confronted with your own mortality. So it's like this weird cycle of like nobody wants to be disabled because they see, how hard it is, at least in their perception, for people with disabilities.
Yeah, I guess if we could have flying chairs like Professor X in the X-Men comics, it would be different. But yeah, I don't know. I just think it's all mindset. Like getting back to what you said before, some people don't disclose in, say, a job interview because they don't have to give a reason to not hire you. If they hire you and find out you have a disability, they have to accommodate. So it's encouraging non-disclosure, it's encouraging dishonesty instead of offering workplaces really meaningful incentives. Because even though the government does offer money for renovations and things like that, it's slow, it's a pain in the butt, and it doesn't cover all of it. And until it's completely neutral or they can make money on it, people are just going to stay same old, same old. Now, you're a finance guy, though. You can talk around that argument, right? That it's expensive, it's going to cost me money.
Yeah, I mean, people have written things about how it doesn't actually cost you as much, and you're gaining in a lot of cases because you can hire people with disabilities who some of them don't get an opportunity to work very, often. So they're going to be your hardest working people. They're going to be your most productive people. Also, like I said before, like the adaptations that you have to make might end up benefiting your entire organization, which increases the productivity of everyone, and your customers are happy because, the lady with the stroller, can go up a ramp now, and the delivery guy isn't hurting his back because he can go up a ramp too. Like, and that's just at its most basic. There's other more complicated disabilities where it can also, benefit and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, usually when people have to go through, adaptations for like the one disabled employee, what they say is, I can't believe, I should have done this ages ago. It would have helped us so much more. You know what I mean?
Meanwhile, those are the same companies that sprung for standing desks or adaptable desks for everybody, only to turn out that, hey, it's still sedentary. You're just standing instead of sitting. You're not actually getting cardiovascular exercise. That was an easy sell.
Right.
But making things easier to move around, the disability is not the condition. The disability is the barriers our constructed society puts in our way, right?
In a lot of cases, like it's kind of a combination of both, but at the moment, it's more to do with society because people have, people adapt to their diagnosis.
Yeah, like that's true.
You're going to need surgical intervention or medical intervention or drugs at some point, but eventually people figure out a way to like live their lives despite their circumstances. The thing that really gets in their way is, a world that isn't made for them, isn't welcoming to them, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? So definitely the percentage is like 60% environment, 40% diagnosis. The environment is always more of that equation, I would say.
Super well put. Aaron Broverman, lead editor of Forbes Advisor Canada. It's a personal finance wing of Forbes, also a disability writer out of Waterloo. Aaron, thanks so much for coming on It's Not Therapy and talking about your experiences and wisdom, and a common friend that I forgot you knew. That was nice to reminisce about Andre too.
Yeah, thanks so much. I always love to reminisce about Andre, the anti-giant, giant Iron Man fan, and it's so nice to be had on This Is Not Therapy, and I hope you have more people with disabilities on.
Me too. Stay tuned, listeners. We will be back after this break. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we're still talking. There's no good term for it. Living with a disability, overcoming disabilities, what I learned from my disability, blah, 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 cliche. Sometimes living with a disability just sucks. And I don't even, like I said, I don't think about my stuff as disabilities. They're just my deal. And other people have other deals. And everybody has something. Now, the thing about the long COVID specifically is, like I said off the top, it's a condition that's been politicized. And that makes dealing with it especially difficult. Governments don't want to get into an actual program for people with ongoing issues. You know, there are so many of us that some sort of compensation would be really expensive. So we can't do part-time work that would make it make sense for everybody. And, you know, people won't hire us for full-time work if they find out we have long COVID. So we get the thoughts and prayers and then an entire system that will only let us participate in long COVID monitoring programs if we can take a Thursday a month to travel to downtown Toronto. Now, I live outside of downtown Toronto. Even a half day is a whole day because of travel time. That's not feasible for people who work full-time and are already exhausted because we have long COVID. And the thing about long COVID is this is a real opportunity, right? For everyone to get better at accommodating talented people who might just need a little tweak to the system. It's not just about using your arms or using your legs or your eyesight or your hearing. It's about brain fog. It's about scheduling. It's about flex time. It's about being able to work from home. Because some days my brain's working great as long as I can lay down, because I get dizzy if I have to stand up for too long. And so a 9-to-5 office job is not going to get me at my most productive. And then there's those bad periods where I'm completely exhausted. And accordingly, I get anxious or depressed. And I'm dismissed as having a mental health problem, right? It's not a mental health problem. It's a scheduling problem. I'm doing too much on a timeline that works for other people more than it works for me. And my brain is responding to my body giving out. And even those of you who don't have recognized health issues have probably experienced that, right? That's not us. That's the system. The system is burning out even able-bodied people. And that's why we're offering workshops that are neurodivergent friendly. They are very, very respecting of privacy. You don't have to show your face on camera. You don't have to use your voice on microphone. You can use a pseudonym and you can just respond by chat. I'm hoping you'll join us April 29th, 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Not beating yourself up. That's what we're going to talk about. Tickets are only $10 and it's 2 for 1. So if you want to bring a moral support buddy, you can. Or if you want to buy a ticket for someone you think could use it but probably won't go on their own, that's why we do the 2 for 1 tickets. So nottherapyshow.com, nottherapyshow.com. Check it out there. You can also join our mailing list so you get updates for future events like this. Some are going to be in person, some are going to be online, or Twitter, Instagram, Not Therapy Show. That's it for the show. I enjoyed talking to Aaron so much. We don't have time for anything else. Thanks for listening. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. And remember, your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Take care.